and I discovered that I have children. It was news to me because I don't actually have kids in my household. And so I started to wonder what's going on here. How did this information get populated in my account? I started to do a little deduction and said, okay, well, I was homesick for a while the other day and I was watching a lot of cartoons, so maybe it means that just based on my previous behavior, Netflix is going out of its way to algorithmically adjust my account and say, you know, hey, it's likely, at least, we know that you might have kids. And of course, that's a fair assumption to make, and it's actually a very practical assumption to make in the sense that busy parents might not have time to kind of mess around with the settings and figure out how to get that kind of contained, safe space for kids to watch only content that's appropriate for them. So, fair, that's a useful algorithmic detection, right? But to me, it reads as a kind of almost offensive algorithmic immaculate conception, right? And then I start to wonder, because I care about where my data is going, obviously this is only in the context of Netflix as I can see it right now, but I have no idea who Netflix's third-party partners might be, where this information might go in other contexts where I might be marketed to. So I start to wonder about even pretty innocuous examples like this. So that's what I want to talk a lot about today. I want to talk about the ways that personalization is something that we as users start to take personally. And that's either when things get us wrong or when they get us, show us things that don't actually reflect who we think we are. And I think there's also a possibility of actually solving this problem. And so I actually want to present a couple ideas of how interfaces can help users understand what's going on. Walk through a couple more examples because taking things personally, I'm actually drawing a lot from my own personal experiences here. So this is a cheese board that I had as my cover photo for a while on Facebook. A little silly, but I really like food, so. But my caption said, Liz Lemon plus Martha Stewart. And so, of course, I say nothing about cheese here, right? But then on Facebook, I start to see ads for beer that goes well with cheese and actual cheese boards themselves. So I start to think, wow, Facebook's image recognition is really, really good, and maybe that's what's going on here. Or it could just be that Facebook thinks I'm demographically bougie, which, fair, maybe that's true. But again, as a user, I have no sense of where this information is coming from, how these ads are being targeted to me, what they're based on, whether they're super targeted or just kind of based on one or two demographic details. Now, that's all well and good when we're talking about movies and cartoons and cheese, but it gets a little bit more extreme when you start to see things like this. This was an ad I got for an anorexia research study. So this made me think, okay, what about my data suggests that I am eligible for this kind of study? Is it because I use a Fitbit? Is it because I use MyFitnessPal? They have a lot of data tracking on their website, retargeted ads, so it's possible that some of that is connected. But again, as a user, I start to make all these kind of explanations for why this shows up, but I don't have any indication of really what is going on behind the curtain. So I actually looked into this myself. I went to the study's website. It turns out that the study was for women between the ages of 18 and 45 in the Boston area. I said, okay, well, that's a pretty coarsely targeted set of people. I was living in Boston at the time. So, okay, fair. But in some ways, that's not much different than the way you would normally target a population by buying a subway ad. So it's easy to explain it away in this context, but because it's showing up there on my feed in that personalized, targeted advertising space, I have to try to understand how I'm supposed to interpret this as a user. And given that it's in that special, privileged, personalized space, it could be that it's much more personally targeted to me. So there's a lot of ways I think that personalization is just not working for us. And I think that happens for a lot of different reasons. So it could just be that the data is not very reflective of who I am. It's maybe false information. There's a lot of inference going on when you're talking about data brokers making connections and inferences based on large data sets. We all know that in the kind of data science community. It could be that my intention is not reflected in the way that I want it to be. It could just be that the interpretations that have been made are not actually matching up with what my actual intention is. And we all know that when we start to see ads for things that we were just buying as a gift for somebody, that's not really my interest, it was just a one-off kind of context. It could also be, like in that anorexia ad case, that it's just coarsely targeted to me. So the potential for hyper-targeting and individually targeting users is there, but the reality is that people are buying ads in a very rudimentary and basic way, right? Based on all those same kind of categorizations that we used to buy ads with. It can also just be that there's kind of a disconnect between the quality information and the current state. So there was an example recently about a woman who it had been triggered in her marketing profile that she was pregnant, but then she had a miscarriage. But she still received the bottle of, or the sample of baby formula in the mail at the time that she would have been having this child. Of course, that's kind of traumatic if you're suffering a miscarriage, right? So that's this perfect example of where you have this like trigger moment in the data set, wherever that may be, but there's no connectivity, there's no continuity between where that data starts and where it ends up in future uses. So I think at worst, personalization is about targeting people. It's actually alienating people. I think if we think about the word targeting for a second, if all this data science that we're doing is about targeting people, like maybe we should think about it in a slightly different way. I think partly that's because right now, personalization is actually being done to people rather than being done for people. I like to talk about this in the context of describing that feeling, that creepiness feeling, as it's not just about being creepy. I think it's actually more about the fact that in these personalized interfaces, these personalized experiences, we're supposed to be seeing something that's a reflection of us. It's based on all this previous behavior, previous data about me. But when it doesn't match up with who I think I am, that's more the uncanny feeling, that it's supposed to be me, but it doesn't really look like me. But what if it is me? Like, how am I supposed to know how to interpret this experience? And of course, all this is bad for everyone involved, right? The user's not happy, the marketers are not happy because they're not being effective, they're spending money where they don't necessarily need to, and it also has bad effects on the impact that the platform has. So, Facebook or Twitter gets a bad rap for having all this content that's not useful to you, right? I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of what we're talking about when we're talking about using data in these contexts is that we're making so many assumptions. And obviously, we can fit the model as close as we possibly can, but there's still an assumption involved in applying this information. And for the most part, we haven't given users an opportunity to respond to that assumption and confirm or deny whether it's a right assumption. So when we get into contexts where we're talking about in the Facebook newsrank algorithm and their newsfeed, I think it's called FYI now, they're talking about 100,000 different data points that go into influencing what comes up in your personalized newsfeed. So we're talking at that kind of a scale. That's so much information. It's kind of hard to actually understand what influences and what doesn't, as a user especially. But I think if we look at even in the case of Facebook, as a user, I don't think a lot of people think about the fact that the news feed is being optimized towards getting you to spend more time on Facebook, right? It's not about giving you the best content. It's about giving you content that will keep you there longer, really, if we get down to it. And so I think it's worth thinking through what we're trying to optimize for. I think this becomes increasingly more important because it's not just Facebook app that we're talking about anymore. We're going to be seeing interfaces that are deeply personalized to us no matter where we end up. There isn't going to be a neutral experience. And Eric Schmidt has already said this. It was quite a while ago that he said this quote, but he said it will be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not, in some sense, been tailored for them. We've obviously already seen this in search, but you're starting to see that even in the Apple Next suggested app that you might want to use. And that's all well and good and great, especially when it's supposed to be making your experience better. But as a user, how are we supposed to interpret these things? How are we supposed to know and have a say whether it's actually a reflection of how we want to be using these interfaces and technologies? So if it isn't obvious, I'm here to represent the user. I think there's not enough attention being paid to what users want or what users might be needing down the line. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But what I'm trying to propose is a personalization spectrum. So in all those cases that I was talking about, what I was lacking was an ability to understand just how personalized an experience really was. How many data points was it taking into account? How many factors was really going on behind the scenes in this experience? So what I would love to see is some kind of interface that gives you a sense of what's going on in that context. I think this does one of two things. It both gives users some signals for understanding how they're supposed to interpret an experience, but it also has the potential to expose kind of levers or dials to be able to expose to users an opportunity to say, I want a little bit more of this, a little less of that. And I think most of the platforms that we have right now are doing a lot of assumption making and just looking at your previous behavior and not giving you a chance to specifically express your intent. So I put this out as a very rough idea as a proposal. Obviously, I'm not going to be implementing this. I don't have, control over products and services and things like that. So what I'm proposing this is just as a kind of thought experiment to think about how can we make personalization interfaces a little bit more accessible and usable to users. So now I want to talk through a couple of ways that I think this might work in practice. If we started to look at some of these interfaces that are very personalized, what could we do? What would it look like? So in the context of talking about ads, we already have the ability to start to dig deep into our preferences and our ad interests, right? So Google, Facebook, a couple other places let you do this. Even a couple ad brokers actually have started to let you do this. And so you can go to the profile settings and say, okay, these are all these assumptions that have been made about what you like. Apparently, I just noticed I have Australian football on there. This is a screenshot from my own account, and urban hip hop. But it's giving you the chance to click yes or no. These are all based on inferences, based on your previous searches and behaviors, but at least you get a chance to say yes to this, no to that. What I still don't have is a way to express, like, I think it's appropriate to use these categorizations or these interests in X context or Y context. And so I think that's something that could be improved. Right now in my news feed and any kind of feed experience, there's a lot of assumptions being made about what content will keep me there, like I said. So right now I see a lot of these like top-down recipe videos. I'm sure you're all familiar with these, where they just like have, you know, the ingredients and mix it all up and speed it up, and it's like a mini cooking show. Then you've also got, you know, lots of fluffy animals and creatures. I admit that I spend a little bit too much time when I'm scrolling through Facebook. Those auto-playing videos keep you there, right? But if Facebook is optimizing for those automated videos, which capture your attention, of course they're going to get you to stop, right? I want to be able to say, okay, those are all fine, but like this week, you know, after the election or something, I just want to see more news. Or maybe I might say, I don't want to see any news. Like, remove all news from me. I just need more fluffy animals to deal with the election. But I don't have any ability to either adjust that or adjust it in a dynamic way, right? Like, what if I just want to be able to change that on a week-to-week basis? Now, this is an example from Spotify. Their Discover Weekly playlist is actually one of their most popular features, and it's all about personalization. And so each week you get a new playlist that's supposed to be giving you fresh content, right? So stuff that you're probably likely to enjoy based on your previous history, your existing playlists, what other people like, what your friends like on Spotify. And that's all just based on previous behavior. You're not saying yes or no, up and down, voting on songs, of course. So that's great. But in this context, I don't get to be able to say, well, this one friend of mine has great music taste. I would love for you to weigh his interests and his activities higher than everyone else, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Like, for you to be able to say, please, you know, skew that direction. Or, for example, I listen to a lot of Spotify while I'm writing, so I listen to all this kind of ambient music without any lyrics or anything. And that starts to show up in my new material. And what if I wanted to just say, you know, I just want to hear, you know, a different set of things. Like, that's just the background music. Like, I don't need, sure, maybe I start to get bored of background music, but I wouldn't, it's not really what I want to be discovering at any given time. So what if I could have a little bit more input into their algorithm that reflects what my intentions are? I want to point out a bunch of examples of where we're already starting to see this exposure of what's going on and explanations and ways to help you interpret what's going on in context, especially Facebook. So Facebook is actually doing a pretty good job of addressing this. What they aren't doing is really doing it in a holistic way. It's more at this like micro transactional level. So again, in the context of ads, we are starting to see the ability to click that little gray triangle. It's kind of hidden, but you get to say, why am I seeing this? And they will give you a very rudimentary and rough answer to what you're seeing, especially in the context of ads. But at least that's a start to say, well, this one was targeted based on X content. And so this is one that I happen to have seen. One of the reasons you're seeing this ad is because Babyland, the one-stop baby fair, wants to reach women between the ages of 25 to 35 in Singapore interested in infants. Okay, that's fair, but it doesn't tell me anything about why they think I'm interested in infants. Again, it could just be that I'm a woman between the ages of 25 and 35, so obviously you must be interested in infants. But so I have this ability to see this information, but it's still not fully really explaining why this is targeted to me personally. So of course you can drop down and then later, lower on the page, there's the manage your ad preferences, and that's where you can go to look and see where that personalization comes from. In the context of the news feed, I already have the ability to start saying, you know, picking and choosing which friends you want to make sure that you see at the top of your feed. And that's been a relatively new feature that they've added. You also have the ability to say, stop showing me content from this news website or like The Onion. just remove it from my, I don't know why you would want to do that, but remove this from my feed. And that's obviously become especially important in the context of talking about fake news on Facebook. And so users do have the ability to say, I don't want to see this source or that source whenever it shows up in your feed. But again, it's that micro transactional level, and that's really probably heavy lifting for the user to actually accomplish. And in the case of recommendations, we've also started to see these kinds of summary interfaces, both on Facebook and on Twitter, where you are seeing what your friends talked about while you were away from Twitter or Facebook for a while. Again, all based on your previous behavior, so it's going to be skewed towards the things you liked or interacted with the most. But what if I just wanted to say, I want to see the newsworthiest things that I missed, right? Again, there's just no way to have you get to articulate what that content looks like. So I realize that this proposal is, pretty high level, and there's a lot of reasons why these features don't exist in more robust ways. Part of it is that, like in that micro interaction case, it's a lot of heavy lifting on the user's part, right? To manage all your interests and preferences would be a lot of heavy work for the user. So it's beneficial to just make assumptions about those things. What I think is interesting is if we start to just see that more, even if it's slightly hidden or just not like confronting you every time you open the app, but rather that the kind of adjustment ability exists at least in some sense, right? So just having the option is what I'm kind of proposing. I think there's also the fact that there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to actually start to explain why you're seeing something. So that includes, of course, that exposes some of the data practices or algorithmic practices of whatever the platform is, and that's the secret sauce. And we all know that that's usually not something we want to expose, especially to people that might want to game the system. There's also just the fact that if we start to take into account things like machine learning being applied to all these contexts and inferences, there's a lot of cases where that's becoming harder and harder to actually articulate what precisely is happening, like among the engineers, let alone to the users, right? So that becomes increasingly complicated. But I think if we look at, especially in the context of Facebook, most of all, the reason that we don't have more of these exposed features is that the optimization model is up to the platform or up to the company. And it's really, in the case of Facebook's example, again, is about optimizing towards keeping you there longer. It's not about optimizing your ultimate experience or helping you experience Facebook the way that you want to experience Facebook. It's really in the company's interest. And I think that kind of approach to personalization is not going to have a long life as a kind of strategy position to say we're just trying to get the most out of users. I think ultimately users are going to start to figure out that, like, if all I'm getting from Facebook is cat videos because I've previously watched cat videos, that's not going to be a valuable service in the long run. And I think we will start to see ways that third-party interventions start to address some of these needs. So in this most recent discussion about false news on Facebook or filter bubbles on Facebook, we've already even started to see third parties working on, this is a Chrome extension that allows you to look at your Facebook content, your Facebook friend network, and basically it shows you how left or right, how blue or red your Facebook newsfeed is. So it's doing this interface work of showing you just how much of a bubble you live in. And so I will admit this is a screenshot of mine. I live in a very blue bubble. There's some red dots over here, I promise. But you can hover over them and see who those people are, what news sources it's based on. So it's looking at your friend's network, and also then looking at what news categorizations they have liked. So they have to have liked CNN or Fox News or anything like that. So that's a really interesting data point as a user to be able to see that and be like, okay, like way more than I thought, because I pay attention to those red dots when they do show up in my feed because they're annoying, frankly, and they're some of my relatives, in fact. But it's interesting as this kind of interactive user interface to be able to say like, yep, okay, this starts to make sense. I can look at how, most importantly, it actually gets you to see how your data might be used by other contexts. But most of these examples I've been talking about are pretty innocuous. Cheese, newsfeed, content, cat videos, that kind of thing. But I think it becomes even more important to talk about the ethical choices involved when exposing what's happening to users. Starts to show you things that are slightly more sensitive. These are categories that data brokers sell lists of people's names based on. These are financially vulnerable populations. Pretty much anyone can buy this content or this as a kind of marketing categorization, or could even be targeted for whatever data purpose you want to apply it to. How do we feel about personalization in these contexts? We've started to see examples of this being exposed by investigative journalists who are looking at the fact that price discrimination or price differentiation is happening just based on geographic information. So what your zip code is might suggest your willingness to pay for a product at the same retailer. And of course, as I say, as more of our experiences become personalized, more of these interfaces, it's really hard to tell what you're seeing versus what somebody else is seeing. It's going to be a real question. Like, is that even legal? Or even in the context of entertainment, you have this is a movie that came out, I think, maybe a year or so ago. There were two versions of the trailer that came out. And one version of the trailer was kind of rough and really focused on the gang kind of intense context of LA hip hop. LA? Yes, LA. That was targeted to African American demographic. And on Facebook, they actually called that the ethnic affinity group. Now, this categorization, in this context, okay, it's associated with rap, maybe fine, that's a cultural categorization. But if you use that same categorization, ethnic affinity group, to target ads directly in a political campaign to suppress voters, specifically to suppress voters, by using content from your oppositional candidate who, said something really negative about, basically called black people super predators, that word just would be enough to get people not to want to go out to vote for Hillary Clinton because it was such a kind of heated language. So Trump could buy targeted Facebook ads based on ethnic affinity group, and they actually called this voter suppression. So this is questionable as whether this is actually legal to get that level of targeted advertising, especially for a news campaign. But again, it's one of those examples where, is this personalization of content and ads, or is this an effort to discriminate and make this a political issue as well? So as I said, I think this question of how we personalize and how users understand how we personalize is only going to become more important. That's especially true as we are experiencing interfaces that basically are removing all of the signals that we used to have for what's going on, especially as we have these Siri-like conversations, but also because we're starting to see places where we're delegating our decision making to agents and chatbots and everything else that's out there kind of acting on our behalf. So being able to express our personalized interests and preferences is going to be even more important. Now, I want to address all the kind of like business-minded folks in the room by saying that this, I think, is important from a competitive perspective. I think this actually solves the assumption problem, so it gives you the opportunity to test the assumption and actually give users a chance to respond. And as data scientists, we want to be able to test our hypotheses, right? But I think it's also an opportunity for this to be really the best quality experience for users, and ultimately that's in everyone's interest. So again, I just want to compel the data scientists, the product developers, the kind of policy people to have a little bit of a conversation about how you might change that interface to expose things to the user that might at first feel uncomfortable, but it's at least a gut check to say, would we be okay exposing this to the user? And that's a pretty good question to be asking ourselves. What it all comes down to for me is this question of, all these things that are working or not working in personalization really come down to a question of what are we optimizing for? I think that's the big question that all people who are working with algorithms or targeting or even just fitting to the best possible model. What are we trying to optimize for? I want to leave you with that, and I hope you think about personalization a little differently. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
So we'll open the floor for some questions right now.
I'm wondering if we can do, I haven't heard a lot of women, so maybe we can do a little bit progressive stack and start with the ladies this time, since there is a prize on the line. Anybody? Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we're sort of coming from a multidisciplinary perspective here and thinking about, how do we bring ethics, the user into the process of designing algorithms, and thinking about multidisciplinary teams. So what are your sort of thoughts on how you would design a team, construct a team where you've got people who have some sort of input on this, the ethics or the user perspective, and how do they interface with engineers, for example? How would you architect a team like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. So obviously, we talk a lot about pairing data scientists with the topic area specialists, but I would love to see more of the, people who are doing user research also pulled into those conversations, and the interface people pulled into those conversations, especially when we're talking about kind of data-driven interface design that's affecting how users actually are interfacing with any given application or experience. The other thing I would say is there's just not enough, nobody's doing a lot of user research on this, mostly because it's expensive and time-consuming, and it's easier to just do the big data science interaction A/B testing, but you're not actually asking users what they feel about it, right? Like, there's not a whole lot of, it's time-consuming to do that kind of sitting with people and watching them use the device and use the interaction. So I would love to see more of that like ethnographically driven user research, where it's like sitting with people and like looking and feeling about how they interact and what they're thinking when they're looking through, like asking about, what do you think is going on here? There's not a lot of people doing that kind of interface work. So.
Yeah, Jim.
Going around.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey. Sarah, a nice talk. I love it. I just have this question to ask for a very long time. Because social media is a big thing now, right? Everyone is trying to create a platform to gather information. So, you see, personally, have anyone actually studied Facebook as a social media platform? And do you accept Facebook as a data-driven information platform that you can rely upon? Have anyone actually studied what is the significance level? Can we trust what we see in Facebook today?
So there are plenty of people studying Facebook in varieties of ways. I think maybe not quite at that high level of a question. But I mean, personally, I think there's going to start to be a little bit more user literacy surfacing because we're having these conversations about fake news and filter bubbles. Like the concept of the filter bubble has been like in the conversation in tech since like 2011. That's when Eli Harrison wrote his book. And I think it's fascinating that like it took this long for it to really sink in. It took an election that was like so divisive in the US especially to become more clear as this like problem that faces users because we have all relied so much on this one interface. So I'm hopeful that there is like more kind of rumblings, at least in a bunch of different places where it's an ethics question. Is Facebook a media company? Is it not? Is it a tech company? Like those questions are all being asked in important places right now. And so I'm pleased that the conversation is getting there. Do I personally trust Facebook? I think, I have all of those examples I was giving, like they are starting to be accountable to some of those things, right? Like those features exist because there have been, rumblings or complaints, or like they know that it's a real question or a thing to be addressed. Facebook talking about the like creepy feeling, they don't want that. That's a bad user experience, right? So I think they're doing everything they can to make a better experience. But again, it still goes back to that, what are we optimizing for question. So I would love to see more conversations about this, either from, if you're having that conversation in the product development side or, from the policy side. I think starting with this question is actually really, really important. And I don't think enough tech conversations actually start here.
Sara, thanks very much for your talk. In the oil and gas industry, if anyone who has been following conferences over the last 20 years will hear that 60% of a geologist's time is spent looking for and checking data. That really hasn't changed. I'd like to see us move to the other extreme of in-your-face data. And some of what you're talking is about connecting those two, using P2P, using some of the techniques. How do you see us get started on that road?
In-your-face data, I like that. I guess it really depends on to what end, right? Is it to inform the user? Is it to make the insight happen faster, right? I think a lot of that has to do with the I keep hearing all these conversations about how much work is the upfront work of the wrangling, as it were. And I think that when we start to talk about interfaces with users, that is, you don't have any time for wrangling when you're talking to users, right? So really focusing on that quality of visualization interaction, like having what you present to users, especially when we're talking about consumers, be the most clear and compelling and articulate thing, and thinking a lot about how that gets presented is really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we get this one more question? Yeah.
Right.
Hi, as a data scientist part under marketing, I find this either quite hard to reconcile because, for example, if we're talking about what we're optimizing, and from Facebook's perspective, I want people to spend more time on the site. And if I find it hard to justify having this feedback platform when my business users will come to me and tell me that within the time spent, if it decreases or it increases, give a strong indicator of whether your targeting is working or not. So it's finding that balance and having that conversation that I find very hard to reconcile. So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that, and that's fundamentally why we haven't seen more of that kind of interaction. I don't know, I think it's going to be about quality time. Like, if you're just talking about total time, that's not a metric of, like, that's just a base metric of how much time you have been spending, right? But if you want to talk about a quality experience, like, you need some other metric to talk about. And so whether that's quality in terms of, like, you got the right stuff, just the right stuff, and you didn't spend extra time, like, how do we start thinking about that? So there's another guy's work who used to be a Google designer, I think. His name is Tristan Harris, and has a website called timewellspent.io. And he's starting to think through that question of, like, if we're only talking about optimizing for those metrics, we're not going to get anywhere. Or, like, what other metrics can we start to think about? So I think part of that conversation is already happening, and I think that's probably where you're going to find some hints at where we can think about.
So it's about like redefining metrics and what we're looking
Yeah,
for.
yeah, I think so. That's at least one place to start. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think that's the last. Can we have one last question? One last question.
Maybe not question so much. I really like this session because the thing is, I came here wanting to learn more about data science, and I'm more Liz Lemon rather than Matas to it, the leaning. I'm trying to reconcile this presentation when the question is, what are we optimizing for? As an economist, I came here trying to find out what will be the way for me to harvest the big data out there to help me in policy formulation. But here you're throwing a dimension that so far I haven't included in my framework for policy formulation, data ethics. Because as an economist, you look at things from macro perspective, whereby you look at it in terms of, okay, what is the data telling me at the macro level?
Yeah,
I wouldn't like to color it. I would like the data to tell me what is in there. What you have brought up this afternoon is an eye opener, and I think coming from the perspective of I don't know the rest of the audience whether they would agree with me on this or not. A country that may not be at the state of the art where the US is, talking about what are we watching. Netflix is telling me, okay, based on what you have watched, perhaps Zarina, you should watch Gilmore Girls, and I don't know why that's the case.
We definitely should watch Gilmore.
So now, this is an eye-opener for me as a policymaker. So the thing is, when I go back, I don't know whether I would include this into my framework, because I find it difficult to put a spend or a portion of data ethics into it, because currently it doesn't have that. So I would like for you to suggest to me what is it that you will be looking for here. What would you suggest a policymaker to look at, if that's the case? Putting the nuances of Malaysian environment, Malaysian economy, Malaysian stage of development.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great. Thank you for saying that. I think ultimately what I'm coming down to, and why I rely so heavily on all these personal examples, like using screenshots from my own experience, is that I think a lot of times we're in these positions of looking at large data sets and big data, it's really easy to forget the individual. And all it takes is just thinking about, like, how does this affect me? Like, if I'm part of this large data set, what does this look like to me? Can I put myself in the shoes of this person, that person, this other person that's categorized based on this information? I think that's like one super easy step to, especially when you're talking about policy decisions, right? Like thinking about individuals, like putting it to whether it's like a hypothetical person or like somebody you actually know as a really concrete way of like talking about the personal effects of all this kind of work. Thank you so much.